The moment Prince Calither stepped into the chamber, the world as he understood it fractured. He did not shout. He did not run forward. He simply stopped, framed in the doorway, every instinct honed by royal upbringing and battlefield training colliding violently with the impossible sight before him. Sorrow, who had once torn a training drone in half for drifting too close, who had drawn blood from 3 elite handlers before Calither had bonded him, was curled protectively around a human. A human's, bleeding, alive, and most impossibly of all calm. Calither's hand moved on instinct, reaching for the weapon at his hip before he forced it to still. Drawing a blade now would be a declaration not just of threat but of distrust. Sorrow would react, and if Sorrow reacted. The human looked up. Her expression was composed, though her skin had gone pale beneath the smear of blood. Her dark hair was pulled back in a simple tie, a few loose strands clinging to her forehead with sweat. There was pain in her eyes, yes, but no fear, not of the dragon, not of him. "Your Highness," she said, as if greeting him in a corridor, not sitting inside the coiled body of one of the deadliest creatures in the Empire. "I apologize, I heard distress." Calither stared at her. "You entered this chamber," he said slowly, each word deliberate, controlled, while Sorrow was unaccompanied. "Yes, Your Highnesses." "You were briefed on the protocols." "Yes, Your Highnesses." "And yet," he said, gesturing faintly at the scene, the dragon, the blood, the utter absurdity of it, "you chose to ignore them." The human tilted her head slightly, as if considering the question. "I chose," she said carefully, "to respond to an animal in distress." Sorrow made a low sound then, not a growl, not quite, a rumble. It vibrated through the stone floor, deep and resonant. Calither's gaze snapped to his dragon. Sorrow's eyes were half-lidded. Relaxed. Content. The dragon's tail shifted slightly, tightening just enough around the human to signal possession, not threat. "Mine." The word was not spoken aloud, but Calither felt it nonetheless, the bond between them translating instinct into understanding. His dragon was pleased. Calither took a slow breath. "Stand," he said. The human hesitated, not in defiance, but in calculation. She glanced down at Sorrow, her hand still resting lightly against the dragon's jaw. "It's all right," she murmured to the creature, voice soft. "I'm not going anywhere." Sorrow's eyes flicked to Calither, then back to her. The dragon did not move. Calither exhaled. "Sorrow," he said, his tone shifting, not commanding but firm. "Release." For a moment, nothing happened. Then slowly, reluctantly, the coils loosened. The human rose carefully, one hand braced against Sorrow's side for balance. Up close, the extent of the injury was clearer. Blood had soaked through the fabric wrapped around her forearm, dripping in slow, steady lines to the polished floor. Calither stepped forward. "Come here," he said. She obeyed immediately. That, at least, was something normal. He reached for her arm, his touch precise and controlled as he unwound the makeshift bandage. The bite marks were unmistakable, deep punctures, clean and deliberate. Not a kill. A warning. Sorrow had chosen restraint. That realization unsettled him more than the rest. "You should be in the medical wing," he said. "I will be," she replied, "after I clean the spill." Calither looked at her sharply. "The spill?" She nodded toward the overturned basin, water pooled across the floor, reflecting the chamber lights in fractured patterns. "That's what upset him," she said, the sound, the sudden change. "You are bleeding," Calither said. "Yes, Your Highnesses." "And your concern is the water." "Yes, Your Highnesses." There was no defiance in her tone. Only certainty. Calither studied her for a long moment. "You will go to the medical wing," he said at last, immediately. A pause. "After I." "Immediately." The word cut cleanly through the air. The human inclined her head. "Yes, Your Highnesses." She turned to leave, then hesitated. Her gaze flicked back to Sorrow, who was now watching her with unsettling intensity. "It's all right," she said again, softer this time. "He's here, you're safe." Sorrow exhaled, a slow plume of warm air that stirred her hair. Then she left. What? The medical wing erupted into chaos the moment Mara Voss stepped through the doors. "By the stars. What happened? Is that a bite? Get a scanner. Clear the station." Mara stood patiently as a swarm of attendants descended upon her, their movements efficient but edged with panic. She had expected this. What she had not expected was the silence that followed. The kind of silence that spreads outward, rippling through a room as attention converges on a single point. Mara turned her head. Prince Calither stood in the doorway. He had not raised his voice, had not announced himself, but the room had stilled as if he had. He walked toward her, each step measured. "How is she?" he asked. The lord medic hesitated. "The wounds are controlled, Your Highness," they said carefully. "No venom detected, no sign of infection, however the depth." "She will recover," Calither said. It was not a question. "No, no, Your Highness," the medic said quickly. "She will recover." Mara watched him as he spoke. He was taller than she had realized up close. Not just tall, but precise. Everything about him seemed deliberate, the way he stood, the way he moved, the way his gaze settled on her as if assessing not just her condition but her very existence. "You understood the risk," he said. "Yes, Your Highness." "And you proceeded anyway." "Yes, Your Highness." "Why?" The room held its breath. Mara considered the question. "Because he was afraid," she said. Calither's expression did not change. "Sorrow does not experience fear," he said. Mara met his gaze. "All animals experience fear," she replied gently. "Some just express it differently." A flicker so brief it might have been imagined crossed his face. "You presume much," he said. "I observe," she said. Silence. Then unexpectedly, Calither gestured to the medic. "Finish your work," he said. And he stayed. He did not leave as the treatment began, did not retreat to whatever duties demanded his attention. He remained at the edge of the room watching. Observing. Evaluating. Mara felt the weight of his attention as the medics worked, cleaning the wounds, sealing the deeper punctures, applying regenerative gel that tingled sharply against her skin. "Hold still," one of them murmured. "I am," Mara said. "You are remarkably calm," the medic said. Mara smiled faintly. "It wasn't a hostile bite," she said. The medic blinked. "It broke your arms." "Not completely," Mara said. "If he'd wanted to, he could have taken the whole limb." The medic looked unsettled. Across the room, Calither did not look unsettled. He looked thoughtful. The summons came the next morning. Mara stood outside the prince's private chamber, her freshly bandaged arm secured against her side. The pain had dulled to a steady ache, manageable but persistent. She knocked once. Enter. The room beyond was vast but sparsely furnished, more functional than decorative. Maps, data projections, and tactical displays filled the far wall. This was not just a residence. It was a command center. Calither stood at the central console, his back to her. "Sorrow has refused food," he said without turning. Mara blinked. "I see," she said. "He has not eaten since yesterday." "That's not unusual," Mara said. "After stress, some animals." "He has also refused all handlers," Calither continued, "including myself." Mara hesitated. "That is unusual," she admitted. Calither turned. "Come with me." The dragon's chamber felt different now. Quieter, heavier. Sorrow lay coiled in the center, his massive body still, his eyes open but unfocused. The overturned basin had been righted, the water cleaned, everything restored to its proper order. And yet, something was wrong. Sorrow lifted his head as they entered. His gaze went to Calither first, then slowly to Mara. The change was immediate. The tension in his body eased. The low, restless flick of his tail stilled. "Sorrow," Calither said. The dragon did not respond. Mara stepped forward. "Hey," she said softly. Sorrow's head lowered. "Not fully, but enough." Calither felt something in his chest tighten. "May I?" Mara asked. Calither hesitated. Every instinct told him no. Protocol demanded no. "But, yes," he said. Mara moved closer, her steps unhurried, her posture relaxed. She stopped just within reach, extending her uninjured hand. "Easy," she murmured. Sorrow's nostrils flared. He leaned forward. And then, he pressed his head into her palm. The breath left Calither in a slow exhale. "Okay," Mara said quietly. "Yeah, I see." She crouched carefully, wincing slightly as her injured arm shifted. "You're not scared," she said, "you're worried." Kalither frowned. "About what?" Mara glanced up at him. "About me," she said. "That is." "He hurt me," Mara said gently, "and now he doesn't understand why I'm still here or if I'm all right." Sorrow made a soft, almost questioning sound. Mara smiled. "I'm okay," she said, leaning her forehead briefly against his scales. "See, still here." The dragon's eyes closed. Slowly, trustingly, Kalither stood very still. "I have spent my entire life with him," he said quietly, "and I did not see that." Mara looked at him. "You weren't looking for it," she said. "And you were." "Oh, yes." "Why?" Mara shrugged slightly. "It's what we do," she said, "where I'm from." Kalither studied her. "This is normal for your kind." Mara smiled faintly. "Not exactly," she said, "but caring for something dangerous, something misunderstood." She glanced down at Sorrow. "We're pretty good at that." Silence stretched between them. Then, after a moment, "Sorrow will eat now," Kalither said. It was not a question. Mara nodded. "Yeah," she said, "he will." And for the first time since Mara Voss had arrived at the palace, Prince Kalither allowed himself to consider a possibility that had never, in all his years, seemed plausible. Perhaps the most dangerous creature in the room was not the dragons, and perhaps that was not a bad thing. The first hour passed in disbelief. The second passed in confirmation. By the third, the palace had accepted that something irreversible had occurred. No one used the word bond out loud, not yet. That would require formal acknowledgement, ritual witnesses, and the kind of careful deliberation that the Zeltorian Empire prided itself on. But the word lived in every glance, every hushed conversation, every recalculated hierarchy that rippled outward from the dragon's chamber. Because Sorrow had chosen. And Sorrow did not choose lightly. Mara Voss, for her part, was trying to stand up. "Okay," she said, using the tone she had once used on stubborn animals 3 times her size and twice as dramatic. "I appreciate the sentiment, I really do, but I need to go." Sorrow did not move. More precisely, Sorrow moved just enough to make going anywhere impossible. The dragon's massive body shifted, recoiling with a deliberate casualness that placed one scaled forelimb directly in Mara's path. His tail slid behind her in a smooth arc, closing off the other exit. It wasn't aggressive. There was no threat display, no bared teeth or raised spines. It was simply final. Mara stared at the living wall of violet scales. "You are 8 feet of problems," she informed him. Sorrow blinked slowly as if accepting this assessment. "Your Highness," Mara said, turning her head toward the doorway where Prince Kalither still stood, arms crossed, watching with unsettling intensity. "Your dragon is under the impression that I am furniture." Kalither did not respond immediately. There was something dangerously close to fascination in his expression. "That," he said at last, "is not his impression." "Oh," Mara said. "No," Kalither replied, "furniture can be moved." Mara paused. "That's worse," she decided. Sorrow made a low, pleased rumble. Vel, standing just behind the prince, leaned slightly closer. "Your Highness," he murmured, keeping his voice low enough that it would not carry, "this cannot be allowed to continue without clarification." Kalither did not take his eyes off Mara. "Clarification of what?" Vel hesitated. "Of everything." But that was not how one spoke to a prince. "If the court hears of this," Vel said carefully, "they will demand a declaration. If this is what it appears to be." "It is," Kalither said. Vel fell silent. There was no hesitation in the prince's voice, no doubt. "Only certainty." "Then we must act quickly," Vel said, "before speculation becomes complication." Kalither's gaze flicked briefly to him. "When," he said, "has the court ever allowed speed to prevent complication?" Vel opened his mouth, closed it again. There was no answer to that. "Okay," Mara said, clapping her hands softly once as she rose again, testing the boundaries of her newfound imprisonment. "Let's try this again." Sorrow's head lifted immediately. "Stay," she said. The dragon froze. Kalither's eyebrows rose a fraction. Mara took one careful step forward. Sorrow did not move. 2 steps. Still nothing. 3. The dragon surged up, fluid and immediate, closing the distance in a single motion and pressing his head firmly against her shoulder. Mara staggered slightly. Okay, she said, so that's a no. Sorrow exhaled a warm gust against her neck. Well, she sighed. I have a job, she told him. Responsibilities, people who will notice if I disappear into a dragon's den for the rest of my natural life. Sorrow made a soft, questioning sound. Yes, Mara said, I'm serious. She glanced back at Kalither. Your Highness, I am currently being detained by a reptile. Technically, Kalither said, a veilwing. Technically, Mara said, still a reptile. Sorrow huffed. Mara reached up and scratched lightly along the ridge behind his jaw. I'm not saying you're not impressive, she added quickly. You're very impressive, terrifying, beautiful, still preventing me from leaving. Sorrow leaned into her touch. Kalither watched the interaction with a focus usually reserved for military strategy. Every movement mattered. Every response. Because what he was witnessing was not random. It was structured. Sorrow was not simply reacting to Mara. He was responding to her. Listening. Adjusting. That alone would have been extraordinary. But there was something more. Something deeper. Something that twisted at the edge of Kalither's understanding. Bring food, he said suddenly. Vel blinked. Your Highness. For Sorrow, Kalither said, and for her. Vel inclined his head. At once. He departed swiftly, leaving the prince and the impossible scene behind. Mara glanced at Kalither. Is he always this intense? She asked quietly. Yes, Kalither said. Good to know. She shifted her weight slightly, wincing as her injured arm pulled. Sorrow's head snapped up immediately, his gaze fixing on the movement. It's fine, Mara said quickly, just sore. The dragon leaned closer, nudging her carefully. I said it's fine, she repeated, softer now. You didn't break anything important. Kalither stepped forward. That is debatable, he said. Mara gave him a small smile. I'm still functional, she said. That's my baseline requirement. Kalither studied her. You do not appear to understand the gravity of your situation. Mara glanced around. I'm trapped in a room with a dragon who has decided I'm not allowed to leave, she said. I feel like I have a pretty good grasp on the situation. That is not the situation, Kalither said. Though, he hesitated. Just for a moment. Then, Sorrow has claimed you. Mara blinked. I'm sorry, she said. He's done what now? Claimed, Kalither repeated. Chosen, accepted, the translation is imperfect. Mara looked down at the dragon, who was currently resting his chin on her shoulder with all the casual entitlement of a creature that weighed more than a small vehicle. You didn't mention that, she said to him. Sorrow blinked. Slowly. Is this reversible, Mara asked. No, Kalither said. Of course it is. She took a breath. Okay, hypothetically, she said, what does being claimed entail? Kalither held her gaze. It entails, he said, that you are now under his protection. Mara looked at Sorrow again. I was already under his teeth, she pointed out. Kalither ignored that. It entails, he continued, that harm to you is considered harm to him. That sounds intense. It entails, Kalither said, that you are now by law Kael'vith. Mara frowned. I don't know what that means. It means, Kalither said, that you are no longer merely staff. Mara's stomach dropped slightly. Then what am I? Kalither did not answer immediately. Because the answer was not simple. Not politically. Not culturally. Not personally. You are, he said at last, under royal protection. Mara stared at him. That sounds like a promotion, she said slowly. It is not a promotion, Kalither said. It is a redefinition. Of my job description. Of your existence. Mara blinked. That's a lot for a Tuesday. Sorrow made a soft sound, almost amused. The food arrived in careful increments. First the handlers, who stopped several meters from the dragon and did not move closer. Then the trays slid across the floor with long poles. Then silence again, as everyone present waited to see what would happen. Sorrow did not look at the food. He did not move toward it. He did not acknowledge it at all. Instead, he watched Mara. Mara looked at the trays, then at him, then back at the trays. "Oh," she said softly, "you're waiting." Kalither frowned. "For what?" Mara crouched slowly, ignoring the protest of her arm. "For permission," she said. "That is not," Kalither began. Mara reached out, resting her hand lightly against Sorrow's jaw. "It's okay," she said, "you can eat." Sorrow hesitated. For half a second. Then he moved. Not with the explosive force he had shown before, but with measured intent, lowering his head toward the offered food and beginning to eat. The entire room exhaled. Kalither did not. Because this was something else entirely. Sorrow did not take permission. He did not seek it. Not from anyone's. Not even from Kalither. And yet, "You see it," Vel said quietly, having returned unnoticed to the doorway. Kalither did not look at him. "Yes," he said. "This will change everything." Kalither's gaze remained fixed on Mara, who was now sitting cross-legged beside Sorrow, idly scratching behind his ear while he ate, as if this were the most normal thing in the universe. "It already has," he said. Night fell slowly over the palace. But the silence did not lift. It deepened. Because now it was no longer just shock. Now it was anticipation. The court would hear. The council would convene. The emperor would be informed. And somewhere in the vast machinery of an empire that had stood unchanged for centuries, something small and human and entirely unprecedented had begun to turn. Mara, unaware of most of this, was still negotiating. "I do need to sleep," she said gently. Sorrow looked at her. "I am not sleeping on the floor," she added. Sorrow tilted his head. "That is where you sleep," she said, gesturing. "That is not where I sleep." Sorrow blinked. Mara sighed. "We're going to have to find a compromise." She looked up at Kalither. "Does he have a smaller version?" she asked. "No," Kalither said. "Of course not." She leaned back slightly, resting against Sorrow's side despite herself. He was warm, steady, alive in a way that made the room feel less like stone and more like something breathing. "Okay," she said softly, "we'll figure it out." Sorrow's tail shifted, curling gently around her. "Not trapping. Not this time. Just there." Mara smiled faintly. And somewhere in the quiet, in the deep watching stillness of a palace holding its breath, the future changed shape. The silence did not end when the decree was read. It changed. Before it had been shock, a stunned, brittle quiet that follows something impossible. Now it became something far more dangerous. Calculation. Mara could feel it even if she didn't have the cultural context to name it. The air in the ceremonial hall was thick with attention, not the kind directed at a servant or even a curiosity, but the kind reserved for variables. Unknowns. Potential leverage. She stood very still as the High Chamberlain finished speaking, the words echoing across vaulted stone and polished metal, reverberating through centuries of tradition that had never, until this moment, included her. Ward companions. Kael'veth. Protected by the crown. She did not know what those titles truly meant yet. But she understood tone. And tone said everything has changed. Sorrow shifted slightly at her side, his massive head pressing more firmly against her hip as if sensing the subtle tightening in her posture. The low, steady rumble of his purr vibrated through her bones, grounding in a way she had not expected. "I'm okay," she murmured under her breaths. The dragon's eye, that deep, molten gold, flicked up to her. He did not believe her. Mara exhaled softly. "Working on it," she amended. Across the hall, the court was not pretending anymore. They were watching her openly now. Assessing. Measuring. There were dozens of them, nobles, advisors, military officials, each one carrying layers of history and influence Mara could not yet see. But she could read people. You didn't grow up navigating crowded systems, foster homes, volunteer networks, underfunded shelters without learning to read the room. And this room was thinking. Hard. Not about sorrow. Not about Kalither. About her. She shifted her weight slightly, resisting the instinct to step back to make herself smaller. That had always been her default: reduce, adjust, fit into spaces that weren't built for her. But Sorrow's presence at her side made that complicated. He did not allow smallness. The subtle curve of his body around her was not just protective, it was declarative. Mine. The word echoed again, not in sound but in implication. And the court heard it. Mara could see it in the way their attention shifted, not dismissive, not condescending. Careful. At the far end of the hall, a figure moved. Older than the rest, dressed in layered robes that carried both rank and authority, the High Counselor did not approach immediately. He observed first the dragon, the prince, the human at the center of it all. Then slowly he stepped forward. "Your Highness," he said, bowing his head just enough to acknowledge Kalither without diminishing himself. "This development raises questions." Of course it did. Kalither did not look away from Mara. "It raises answers," he said. The counselor's gaze flicked briefly to Mara. "From a certain perspective," he allowed. "From another, it introduces a variable we do not yet understand." Mara felt that word land. Variable. She had been called worse. But not often in rooms this large. "Then understand it," Kalither said. The counselor inclined his head slightly. "That is precisely the intent, Your Highness." He turned his attention fully to Mara. And for the first time since the decree, someone addressed her directly, not as an extension of the dragon, not as an implication, but as a person. "Mara Voss," he said. His voice was calm, measured, dangerous in the way that quiet authority always is. "You have been granted a position that carries significant implications for our empire, for your species, for the balance between them." Mara met his gaze. "I didn't ask for it," she said. A ripple moved through the court. Not outrage. Not quite. Something closer to surprise. The counselor's eyes narrowed just slightly. "Few who receive power ever do," he said. "I didn't receive power," Mara said. "I filled a water basin." There it was again. That disarming simplicity. The refusal to reframe the event into something grander, something political, something worthy of the weight the court wanted to place on it. The counselor studied her. "Intent," he said slowly, "does not diminish consequence." "No," Mara agreed, "but it explains behavior." A pause. "You walked into a dragon's chamber," the counselor said, "ignored standing orders, sustained injury, and yet you remain here, protected, elevated." "Oh yes. Why?" Mara blinked. "That's not really a why situation," she said. "Everything is a why situation," the counselor replied. Mara considered that. Then, "He was scared," she said. The court shifted. Some of them almost laughed. Not out loud, but in the subtle tightening of expressions, the faint tilt of heads. Sorrow lifted his own just slightly. The rumble in his chest deepened. The counselor did not smile. "Veilwing dragons do not experience fear," he said. Mara glanced down at Sorrow. Sorrow blinked at her. "Slow. Patient." "I think," Mara said gently, "they experience things you haven't learned how to recognize yet." Silence. Real silence this time. Because that was not a servant's answer. That was not a human's answer. That was a challenge. Kalither watched the exchange with something dangerously close to satisfaction. Not because Mara was winning. This was not a contest. But because she was not bending. Not to the room. Not to the weight of expectation pressing in from every direction. She was simply being. And somehow, impossibly, that was enough to hold the attention of an entire imperial court. "You question centuries of recorded behavior," the counselor said. "I question interpretation," Mara replied. "That's different." "And you believe your interpretation is more accurate." "I believe," Mara said, "that if something acts afraid, responds to comfort, and seeks reassurance, then maybe we should consider that fear is part of the equation." Sorrow's head nudged lightly against her side. Agreement. The counselor saw it. Everyone saw it. And that was the problem. Because evidence in a room like this was not theoretical. It was alive. Breathing. 8 feet long and scaled in violet. What? You speak, the counselor said slowly, as if you understand him. Mara shook her head. I don't, she said, not completely, but I'm trying. That is not the same thing. No, Mara agreed, but it's a start. The counselor held her gaze. And then, unexpectedly, he inclined his head. Just slightly. Acknowledgement. Not agreement. But recognition. You will be observed, he said. Mara smiled faintly. I figured. You will be studied. That's less comforting. A flicker of something not quite amusement passed through the counselor's expression. And your actions, he continued, will carry consequences far beyond your personal intentions. Mara nodded. Yeah, she said quietly, I'm starting to get that. What? The formal proceedings ended soon after. Not because the court had reached conclusions, but because they had reached a limit. There was only so much that could be processed in one morning. The rest would come later. In councils, in strategy sessions, in quiet conversations behind closed doors. But for now, they withdrew. One by one, the nobles of the empire bowed and departed, their minds already working, already planning, already recalibrating. Until the vast hall was no longer full. Just occupied by 3 figures. 1 humans, 1 prince, 1 dragons. Mara exhaled. That, she said, was a lot. Yes, Kalither said. She glanced at him. Is it always like that? No. Good. A pause. Is it going to be like that from now on? Kalither considered the question. Oh, yes. Mara sighed. Oh, great. Sorrow nudged her again, softer this time. She smiled despite herself. Yeah, she said, I'm fine. She looked around the now empty hall. So, she said, what happens next? Kalither stepped closer. Not abruptly. Not formally. Just closer. Now, he said, you learned. Learn what? Everything. Mara blinked. That seems inefficient. It is necessary. For who? For you, Kalither said, and for us. Mara studied him. There was no arrogance in his tone. No command. Just certainty. You're taking this very seriously, she said. I am, he replied. Why? He hesitated. Just for a fraction of a second. Then, because you matter now, he said. Mara held his gaze. I mattered before, she said. Kalither nodded. I know, he said, but now they will see it. What? They walked back to the dragon's chamber together. Not as prince and servant. Not as ruler and subject. Something else. Something not yet defined. Mara was acutely aware of the shift. In the way guards moved aside faster. In the way attendants bowed lower. In the way space opened around her as if she carried something fragile and volatile all at once. Sorrow walked at her side. Always at her side. The message was clear. And the palace listened. Inside the chamber, the air felt different. Quieter. Safer. Mara sank down onto the stone bench with a soft groan. Okay, she said, I need to think. Sorrow settled beside her immediately, his body curving around her in a way that was becoming familiar. Kalither remained standing. Watching. You are overwhelmed, he observed. Yes, Mara said, that is an excellent observation. You do not show it. I was taught not to, she said. Why? Mara shrugged slightly. Because when you're the least important person in the room, she said, you learn very quickly that your feelings are not the priority. Kalither frowned. You are not the least important person in this room. Mara smiled a little tired. I'm starting to figure that out. A pause, but it's going to take some adjustment. Yes, Kalither said. It's also going to take a schedule, Mara added. Kalither blinked. A schedule. Yes, Mara said, because I still have things to do. You have no duties as a servant anymore. I have duties as a person, Mara said, and some of those involve finishing what I started. Kalither studied her. You intend to continue cleaning? Oh yes. You are no longer required to. I know. Then why? Because it needs to be done, Mara said simply, and I said I would do it. Silence. Kalither had spent his life surrounded by people who sought advancement, power, recognition, and here was someone who had been handed all three, and was concerned about unfinished rooms. You are, he said slowly, a very unusual person. Mara smiled faintly. I've been told that. Sorrow made a soft, approving sound. The next morning, the East Wing was quiet. Too quiet. The attendants assigned to it had been reassigned. No one had told them why. But everyone knew. And no one wanted to be the one to make a mistake. So the rooms remained. Dust gathering in corners. Surfaces untouched. Waiting. Mara arrived just after sunrise. With sorrow, the guards at the entrance to the wing straightened immediately. Lady Kael'veth, one of them said, bowing. Mara stopped. I'm sorry, she said. What? The guard froze. Your title, he said. Mara looked at him, then at Sorrow, then back at the guard. Please don't call me that, she said. The guard looked deeply conflicted. It is required. Mara sighed. Okay, she said, we'll work on that. She stepped past him. Sorrow followed. The guard did not move to stop either of them. He would not have, even if he had wanted to. The first room was exactly as she had left it. Half finished. Cloth draped over a chair. Cleaning supplies neatly arranged. Waiting. Mara smiled. See, she said to Sorrow, unfinished. Sorrow blinked. She set to work. Not because she had to. Not because anyone expected it. But because it mattered to her. And in a palace that was still trying to understand what she was. That mattered more than anything. Sorrow watched. At first with curiosity. Then with something deeper. He followed her from room to room, his massive form navigating spaces built for smaller beings with surprising care. When she reached high shelves, he lowered his head to allow her to steady herself. When she moved heavy furniture, he nudged it aside with effortless strength. He learned, quickly, as if this too was part of the bond. Part of understanding her. They were halfway through the third room when Kalither arrived. He stopped in the doorway and just watched. Mara's sleeves rolled up, hair coming loose from its tie, moving with the same quiet, methodical focus she had always had. Sorrow beside her. Helping, not guarding. Helping. Kalither exhaled slowly. Because this was what the court did not understand. What they could not quantify or strategize or control. Mara Voss did not change based on circumstance. She did not shift to fit expectation. She simply continued. And somehow, that changed everything around her instead. Mara glanced up. Oh, she said, good morning. Kalither stepped into the room. Good morning, he said. She gestured vaguely with the cloth in her hand. I'm almost done here, she said, then I can. You do not need to justify this, he said. Mara paused. Okay, she said, good. A bit. I was going to keep doing it anyway. I know, he said. She smiled. Sorrow leaned against her side. And in the quiet of the East Wing, far from the politics and the watching eyes and the weight of an empire trying to understand something new, things made a kind of sense. Not simple, not easy, but real. And for now, that was enough.